If you've ever looked into Sea Temperate, you might have heard of a starry ceiling mod. You transform your car ceiling into a dazzling LED display resembling a starry night sky. Recently, I learned that two nations, Iran and Israel, have been busy modding their ceilings. The only catch is that their starry ceilings are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If you haven't caught on yet, I'm referring to these two countries launching missiles at each other nightly. This conflict could make your daily bowl of pho more expensive. The Middle East has been incredibly tense lately. Although they only exchanged fire for 12 days, the whole world was on edge. The two nations have been in an unprecedented state of confrontation. Since 1979, oil prices naturally skyrocketed. Hospital endocrinology departments were overflowing because panicked stock investors were wetting themselves. So, what exactly is the beef between these two giants that makes them pound each other like this? So what's the historical context, and what are the recent developments? Most importantly, how does it affect your wallet and mine? Today, let's break down the Iran-Israel conflict. Please note that the information below is compiled from various sources, so if there's anything inaccurate or needing correction, please feel free to comment below. First, it's important to clarify that Iran is a Muslim-majority nation, and Israel is a Jewish-majority nation. Simply put, Islam and Judaism don't particularly favor each other. There are many reasons for this. Firstly, they are both in the Middle East. Two entities in the same region often dislike each other due to territorial disputes. Secondly, both believe in God but argue over who is God's true messenger. Okay, that's the context. Now, let's dive into the details. Initially, I was quite surprised to learn that Iran and Israel were once quite close, even like brothers, for over half a century when Iran was under the Pahlavi dynasty. Iran was the second Muslim country to recognize Israel in 1950, after Turkey. During this period, the two countries collaborated extensively in military technology, agriculture, and oil and gas. Iran was friendly with Israel because Israel was close to the US, and who knows, maybe Israel could say a few good words to the US to also befriend Iran. Israel also wanted to be cordial with Iran, so that Iran would advocate for it in case surrounding Muslim nations decided to intervene. Overall, it was a win-win relationship. Jewish people had lived in Persia for about 2,700 years and considered it a safe haven, especially during the reign of Cyrus the Great in the 6th century BCE. However, its peaceful coexistence changed with the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, transforming the two old friends into sworn enemies. King Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was overthrown, and a new regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran, was established under Ayatollah Khomeini. This new regime pursued a drastically different foreign policy with an anti-imperialist focus. From his very first speeches, Khomeini directly pointed to the US and Israel as Iran's main enemies, emphasizing that Israel was a nation that needed to disappear to liberate Jerusalem. Just 3 weeks later, Tehran, Iran's capital, cut ties with Israel, only befriending Arab nations. It even converted the former Israeli embassy in Iran into the headquarters of the Palestine Liberation Organization, an organization the US considers terrorist. Iran also positioned itself as the rightful protector of the Palestinians and an adversary of Israel. Naturally, Israel was not pleased with its former friend's actions. Thus, from 1982 onwards, Iran and Israel engaged in a series of proxy wars that significantly impacted the geopolitics of the Middle East. Israel occupied Lebanon, while Iran funded forces opposing Israel. Earlier, we discussed the broad reasons for their animosity. Now let's delve into more specific reasons for the current conflict between Israel and Iran. Firstly, Iran's nuclear program is Israel's primary concern. Iran consistently maintains its nuclear ambitions for peaceful civilian purposes. However, Iran's enrichment of uranium to 60%, a level close to weapons grade, makes Israel extremely nervous. Firstly, Iran is geographically close to Israel and could potentially launch an attack at any time. Secondly, if Iran were to acquire nuclear bombs, Israel would lose its military advantage in the region. Therefore, Israel feels compelled to act decisively, even preemptively, to maintain its strategic superiority. This isn't just about preventing a bomb. It's about preserving Israel's strategic dominance in the region and preventing a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Because if Iran acquires nuclear weapons, Iraq, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt will also want them. Israel, situated in the midst of these generally hostile nations, would be at a severe disadvantage. The second reason for Israel's recent strikes on Iran is the weakening of Iran's proxy forces. Iran has financed and supported Islamist groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon to oppose Israel. These groups are seen as Iran's tools to both curb Israeli influence and expand Iran's regional standing, aiming to become the dominant power. Previously, these Iranian proxy forces were quite effective, but Israel has gradually dismantled many of them. Hamas and Hezbollah have been constrained. The Assad regime in Syria, a key Iranian ally, also weakened significantly. Consequently, Iran's lines of defense against Israel have gradually failed, allowing Israel to directly target Iran's nuclear program. And thirdly, there's the geopolitical struggle for influence. Both countries support opposing factions in civil wars in Syria and Yemen, turning these nations into proxy battlegrounds. Israel views Iran as a major threat to the stability of the entire Middle East. Okay, those are the direct reasons these two powers are fighting. So, what were the recent developments? On June 13, 2025, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, striking over 100 military and nuclear targets across Iranian territory. Iran immediately retaliated with Operation True Promise 3, a barrage of ballistic missiles and drones aimed at critical sites in Israel. This attack quickly caused crude oil prices to surge by over 7%. Gold prices jumped to $3,380 per ounce, while U.S., European, and Asian stock markets simultaneously declined. On June 20, 2025, Israel continued its attacks on dozens of military targets in Iran, including missile production sites and military facilities in western and central Iran. In response, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's military, launched its 17th wave of missiles at bases in southern Israel. As a result, Israel damaged an Iranian carbon fiber factory and reportedly killed a nuclear scientist and several hundred people. Israel also reported dozens killed and wounded, though fewer than Iran, and a train station had to be closed. At this point, the U.S. intervened with new sanctions on Iran, specifically prohibiting Iranian individuals and companies from trading oil and certain critical nuclear-related components. By June 21, 2025, Israel continued airstrikes on important nuclear sites in Isfahan, including a centrifuge production facility, and attacked several other Iranian cities. The Iranian military responded by deploying suicide drones towards Israel, claiming direct hits. Throughout these 9 days, Iran reported at least 430 dead and 3,500 wounded, while Israel sustained at least 25 fatalities. Finally, on June 24, 2025, a temporary ceasefire was brokered through the mediation of the U.S. and Qatar, bringing an end to 12 days of escalating tension. In this direct confrontation, Israel demonstrated its ability to strike deep into Iranian territory, targeting strategic objectives such as nuclear and military facilities. Clearly, Israel possesses air superiority and intelligence capabilities that allow it to strike almost at will. It even claimed to have used a special weapon to simultaneously kill 10 key Iranian nuclear scientists, effectively crippling Iran's nuclear capabilities. Conversely, Iran responded with a strategy of launching numerous missiles indiscriminately, hoping some would hit their targets. Naturally, Iran's approach was not as effective as Israel's. Overall, this exchange was quite lopsided if we consider the casualty figures on both sides. This disparity highlights that the balance of power heavily favors Israel, and therefore we can expect changes in the strategies of both sides moving forward. Israel, now confident of its superiority over Iran, will likely seek to deliver a decisive blow to dismantle the current Iranian regime. Iran, despite being weaker than Israel, might be forced to adopt a defensive posture, strengthen its intelligence capabilities, and devise better ways to counter Israel's power. Previously, Iran had something called the balance of terror. Essentially, Iran has never been able to match Israel militarily, so it resorted to a terse strategy by establishing numerous extremist, death-defying groups. These groups' purpose was to cause disruption and kill, employing dirty and reckless tactics. Naturally, no one wants to fight with reckless, dirty players, so Israel, despite its military might, abundant weapons, and missiles, had to make concessions. These Iranian proxy forces were called asymmetric assets. However, Iran's asymmetric assets are now becoming obsolete, because Israel and the US have largely dismantled them. So, Iran must devise new tactics or risk losing its regime. This situation is not good for global peace. Why? Because Israel, seeing Iran's weakness, might want to deliver a fatal blow to eliminate its enemy. But who knows? Israel might receive support from a major power, take advantage of the situation to defeat Iran, and then use that as an excuse to attack other countries. As for Iran, despite being weaker than Israel, a cornered dog will jump the fence. Being pushed to the wall could lead to an extremely powerful counterattack, resulting in a mad scenario. I might die, but I'll drag you, all your people, and this entire region down with me. Naturally, major powers cannot remain on the sidelines in this conflict. Each has its own calculations. Firstly, the US played a crucial role in providing air defense support to Israel. Over 12 days, the US used approximately 15 to 20% of its interceptor missile reserves to aid its ally, Israel. The cost of this assistance was $800 million. As mentioned earlier, the US has imposed numerous sanctions on Iran regarding the purchase of dual-use technology for its ballistic missile and drone programs. One could say the US is using its financial might to pressure Iran, but everything has two sides. Such financial expenditure will create a significant economic and strategic burden for the US. Money spent on shooting down drones and missiles cannot be used to build infrastructure, invest in public services, or provide free healthcare for its citizens. This, of course, leads to domestic protests. General Douglas Macgregor also stated that the US played this card too lavishly, spending $800 million to shoot down cheap Iranian drones. If the conflict prolongs, the US will certainly exhaust its resources. Similar to the Iraq War, the US will have to manage this deftly. As it is currently focused on Russia and Ukraine, and also paying attention to the Middle East, 10 days of fighting cost $800 million. If the situation isn't quickly de-escalated, it will have to burn tens of billions of dollars in both conflicts. This could lead to economic and geopolitical suicide for the US. If it escalates into a full-scale conflict, in this situation, Russia gains a significant advantage benefiting politically, diplomatically, militarily, and economically. While the US and its allies are sending money to the Middle East to help Israel, no one in Ukraine has the strength to help Zelensky fight Putin. Thus, Emperor Putin can simply send tanks to whatever region he desires and take control. Russia also seized this opportunity to mediate, saying, "Please, friends, stop fighting. I'm here to broker peace. Let's all understand each other a little. Peace is good." And just like that, Russia gained the title of peacemaker, mediating between the US, Israel, and Iran. This then legitimized its war in Ukraine. Furthermore, President Putin can now inject a media campaign with the central theme: "Don't be afraid of the US anymore. They're just puppets of the Zionists." Look, they fought for a bit and got all worked up, spending so much money and so many missiles. They can't be like us, the honorable Russian brothers who fear no one. And so everyone praises Russia, making it even stronger. Not to mention, in this incident, it's unclear if Russia sold any weapons or missiles to Iran. So they earned a lot of money, seized Ukrainian territory, and made their direct rival, the US, look like a clown, a perfect outcome for the Russians. So what about China? China is quite cautious in this matter. It's the usual stance, expressing extreme concern, then affirming China's readiness to cooperate with all parties to play a constructive role in restoring peace and stability in the Middle East. However, its top priority remains national interest. This means you guys can fight all you want. I'll just watch for now. If it looks good, I'll join. Otherwise, I'll stay home. I have plenty of unsold apartments. I'm too busy to intervene. Besides, China is heavily reliant on the supply chain and energy market in the Middle East. China depends heavily on oil imports from the Persian Gulf. A prolonged conflict or the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would severely damage its economy. Therefore, neutrality is essential for China, less related to a moral stance and more towards pragmatic economic self-preservation and maintaining access to energy sources. China at this time wants to build an image as a global peacemaker without having to spend money on direct intervention. Unlike the US in general, peace is precious. They'll just say, "Our house is already broken. Let's not fight anymore." Okay, that's what the major powers are doing. So, how do these conflicts affect us? This conflict has caused oil prices to surge. On June 13th, crude oil prices rose by over 7% due to concerns that energy flows in the Gulf could be disrupted. And Brent crude prices also increased by more than 10%. The main reason lies in the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway separates Iran from Gulf states and connects the Arabian Sea to the Indian Ocean. This route accounts for approximately one-third of the world's seaborne oil shipments, with 21 million barrels per day, an incredibly massive figure. Iran has considered closing the Strait of Hormuz, which would be a worst-case scenario. Oil prices could skyrocket to $100 per barrel, with many predicting it could reach $130, $150 per barrel. If the strait were completely shut down, if you're wondering why this matters, since you don't consume crude oil but rather rice, or you ride a motorbike or bicycle, how does rising oil prices affect you? Point is, oil is a raw material for producing and transporting many things. If oil prices rise, the price of everything else will also increase. Simply put, rising oil prices mean increased transportation costs. Increased transportation costs mean increased raw material costs. Essentially, if the fighting continues for a long time, a single spring roll will become more expensive. However, the threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz is a double-edged sword for Iran because it would cripple Iran's main oil exports, especially to China. This would have severe consequences for Iran itself. Okay, we've discussed the present and the past. So, what about the future? Now, let's outline a few possible scenarios for the Iran-Israel conflict. The first is a continuation of the bilateral war, where Israel and Iran fight each other while the US, Russia, and China remain on the sidelines. In this scenario, the conflict remains a direct confrontation between Iran and Israel. Israel will continue to leverage its military superiority to weaken Iran's nuclear program and military capabilities. Iran, being weaker, might focus on asymmetric retaliation, such as employing terrorist tactics instead of large-scale direct confrontations. This scenario could involve prolonged tit-for-tat attacks, but would not escalate into a broader regional war. The second scenario is the US joining Israel. This is a high-risk scenario that could lead to Iranian retaliation against the US, such as direct attacks on US bases or interests, or blocking oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. If this happens, the consequences would be extremely severe. Iran attacking the US would trigger large-scale US military intervention, and other regions like Europe and even China could get involved. China cannot endure high oil prices for the long term, and this could lead to the collapse of the current regime in Iran. The third scenario involves a diplomatic solution brokered by the United Nations. In theory, a de-escalation through negotiations is still possible. However, the political and strategic costs for Iran would be enormous. To appease President Donald Trump and Israel's Prime Minister, Iran might have to agree to completely halt uranium enrichment, dismantle its enrichment infrastructure under strict U.S. inspection, and disband or dismantle its proxy militias in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. For the Islamic Republic, such concessions would be an unconditional surrender, stripping the regime of its deterrence capabilities and geopolitical leverage. Domestically, this would leave the regime vulnerable to opposition from hardliners and exposed to a disgruntled populace, disillusioned by decades of authoritarian rule and international isolation. The fourth scenario is a global conflict involving Russia and China. This is arguably the worst-case scenario where the conflict escalates beyond the Middle East and draws in direct military involvement from major powers like Russia and China. However, in my opinion, this scenario is less likely to occur, but the consequences would be catastrophic, leading to a global economic crisis and a confrontation between major powers. However, as analyzed, China and Russia each have their own calculations and tend to prioritize economic interest and stability over direct partisan involvement. The fifth scenario is Iran, recognizing its limitations, opting for a white flag and ceasing hostilities. This is a more feasible option for Iran than continuing to fight. Iran might choose to accept losses, preserve the core structure of its regime, regroup, and pursue longer-term strategies. Currently, these are the only 5 scenarios I've considered. What do you think of these scenarios? Regardless, one thing is certain: the Middle East will remain a global hotspot, and we can all sit together, perhaps with a cup of iced tea, and discuss it. This video has been long enough, and I hope you've learned something new from it. Thank you for watching, and see you in another video. Goodbye for now.